Everyone, we're just going to wait for everyone to get settled. Make sure you've got a brew in your hand. Nice to see some familiar faces coming back on this three-part series. Don't forget, if you've got any questions at all, at any point, the Q&A button is at the very bottom. Just click on that and we can ask away. Don't judge the mug. Just before we start, I'm just going to make you all aware about what the productivity program actually is part of. So the productivity program allows businesses like yourself to access grant funding, access to academic expertise to help any projects you may have, bring in any graduate internships to support with growth of the business, as well as new aspects such as business angel network, so you can get angel investment in the business. I think it's a really crucial time right now to be making sure you're utilizing all the different development pots and grants that are out there. I've seen some clients and prospects recently coming to the table being able to get 50% of their marketing paid for by these grants. So if there's anything you want to do, have a chat with the guys at the productivity program or myself after this, and yeah, make sure you're utilizing all the grants available, because it's a very difficult time for all businesses. So make sure you're using the grants to kind of keep pushing forward. But without further ado, this is where the drum roll should start. I've brought Mike Shields, who's our head of PR, on today's session. Mike has been in the PR game for a long time, understands crisis PR, crisis comms, what to do during difficult times, as well as also understanding what's currently working in the landscape. On the last kind of two sessions, you've obviously had myself talking about what I believe is happening in the sphere right now. We had Tom talking about what's happening in the advertising world, and then Mike's going to discuss today the innovative use of PR for these areas. I'll be honest, from what I'm reading, I think this is going to go on for a lot longer than people think. So I think getting this stuff right now is crucial. Like I said, any questions you have, utilize the Q&A button at the very, very bottom, and then I'll interrupt and ask Mike a specific question. Ask as specifically as you want, make it really, really relevant to your business, and we'll help you as best we can. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass over to Mike to get the show on the road.
Hi guys, so as Pete says, I've been in PR for about 10 years, and I'm currently head of PR at Distract. So we've had the department for about a year, just over a year now. And I think what we found in that time is, by trying to be innovative, it's interesting to just kind of know what your niche is and what kind of works for you. Obviously, the sort of role of traditional PR has changed over the last few years. We believe that the press release and features and kind of traditional aspects of PR are still very relevant and kind of serve a purpose, but we're using a few techniques and ways of interacting with journalists and editors and bloggers and just the whole kind of media to kind of get our message across in a different way, and that kind of serves an SEO purpose as well as kind of getting your message out there. It's sort of bringing back real value to your website in terms of visitors and possible conversion to sales and things like that. So it's not just about getting your sort of a face in print, your name in print anymore. It's what that means and what that kind of does in the long term. And I'm going to go through a few things that we've been doing recently and sort of examples that we've seen in the industry that kind of illustrate that a bit more. So while this is kind of like PR in a crisis, I'm going to basically talk about innovative ways you can use PR. And these are things that you can probably start to use quite quickly now. So I'll sort of go on. So basically, what we try to do with each of our clients, and this is across the board at Distract, this isn't just in PR, is to sort of place yourselves as an expert. So no matter what it is that you do, you need to be almost seen as the go-to person for that subject. So there's a lot of people out there trying to kind of share that space. But I guess if you can find a niche or a unique sort of viewpoint that you can put across that places you at the forefront of your sort of industry niche or your industry sort of sector, then that's all the better, really. So at the moment, it's possibly the easiest time to get some press because there's one big headline at the moment, and that's just coronavirus. Like, we've seen every industry's had to react to this in some way, and every industry's had to pivot and kind of change their messaging, change their focus quite significantly. I'm not telling you anything new here, but basically what we've done with a lot of our clients is ask them what they're doing to sort of combat this and how they can kind of pivot their messaging as well as their business at the moment. So this kind of applies to anyone who's kind of thinking about maintaining a message to the press or to their customers or the general public at the moment, because frankly, the news is absolutely rammed with that one subject at the moment. So I thought I'd start by just saying, sort of showing you a bit of a case study almost. So we work with a client called Forbes Burton, and what they do isn't necessarily the most kind of exciting or sort of sexy kind of subject to sort of put towards the press. However, they have managed to sort of find what it is that makes them interesting, or what opinions that they hold that make them interesting, and have really gone to town on that. So what they do is business recovery and rescue. So they will go into a company that's essentially failing or struggling with their debt or sort of arrears to HMRC. You might sort of find a lot of companies at the moment might be actually going to the wall and having to use this kind of service. So this is actually a really weirdly, perversely, a really good time for them. But before that, obviously, trying to get them press was quite challenging, because how do you make something that most people don't want to talk about interesting? And I think this kind of makes the point that no matter how sort of irrelevant you think your business is to the wider press or the wider industry, you're probably wrong. There's probably a way to make yourselves interesting to other people. So they generally help out people who are either in the midst of losing a lot of business, if people have had all their eggs in one basket and have to kind of make up a deficit, that they help them identify their assets or move on, or if things have gone really, really badly, they'll help them wrap up and start again. So I've been working with this company for quite a while, even prior to my time at Distract, and what we identified quite early on in the journey with Forbes Burton was that their managing director, Rick, was actually quite interested in Brexit. He was a sort of quite a big supporter of Leave, which is quite unusual for some people in the industry. So we sort of zeroed in on that a little bit. We've also found that retail companies, obviously retail has suffered over the last few years, and as a result, there's quite a lot to sort of go out there in terms of the likes of Debenhams, HMV, Maplin's, Toys R Us, those kind of brands that have really struggled, and some of them have actually disappeared from the high street, and we've been able to sort of zero in on that. So that's basically how we made something like bankruptcy sexy or appealing. Sexy is the wrong word. Appealing to the press. So really, it's kind of like finding what values you hold and how to sort of pivot that into messaging. So as a result, we were able to kind of find the right angles to kind of go in on. Here's an example. So being optimistic about Brexit and kind of having an opinion which sort of mirrors that of the government. I think either way, you know, if Rick was a staunch Remainer, I think we could have actually gone in on that as well, because frankly, Brexit was quite a divisive issue and a lot of people shied away from it. It's strange that Brexit's almost still happening at the moment. We don't know kind of what's going to happen with that. So the messaging has shifted lately from Brexit to kind of what to do in a crisis. We've got possibly the most coverage lately for this client in particular, from talking about the possibilities and kind of where you need to be and what you need to be thinking about in this kind of situation. So here you can see that Rick was on a website called Ready for Brexit, which is a sort of almost like a soundboard for businesses who want to talk about Brexit and want to have their feelings known about it either way. So he's actually done 2 sort of guest pieces for them, which has been quite interesting. So we did it right at the start and said, you know, it's quite a steady ship and things are going well, and Theresa May's doing really well. And obviously, as that got worse and worse, and then it kind of got sold at the end, according to your point of view, by Boris Johnson. He came in and did another opinion piece just to say, you know, here's where we were in 2016 and here's where we are now. Here's what we think as a business they're based in Grimsby, so the northeast of Lincolnshire and sort of like towards the Humber region. He kind of gave his spin on that. So that's using kind of geography, opinions on a really sort of divisive issue, and just being there to sort of talk to people. Through this approach, we're also able to pivot that kind of coverage where we'd like pitched in his opinion to specific titles about a niche, like so Brexit, and we were able to like use those links to further pitch to bigger titles. So you can see here that he was in the Metro and he was talking about how far debt collectors actually are allowed to go. So Fallsburn aren't debt collectors. They don't collect any debt on behalf of anyone. They act as consultants for people. So basically, they were able to give advice based on their knowledge of like an associated niche. So I think it's kind of seeing the opportunities there and really sort of thinking, well, actually, because we know about this subject, it's quite closely linked to this subject. Can we make something happen in the meantime? Can we sort of like go in on this? So we pitched on that sort of basis and ended up with this coverage. And Fallsburn have been in quite a lot of national publications as a result. They've been in most of the tabloids. They've been in most of the main retail titles that you'll see. And they've been in things like the Express as well. So it's been quite a sort of journey with them, really. Excuse me. So what we call that is kind of newsjacking. So we did that particularly around the retail market's impending doom. It's possibly only going to get worse for retail in the next few months. And again, rightly or wrongly, this is the best time for Falls to kind of be commenting on this kind of thing. You know, what does it mean for the high street? What does it mean for big brands? Which big brands are possibly going to suffer next, or you know, run into difficulties next? So as a result, we've been able to comment on regional things like what, for example, here. So what Debenhams crisis means for Bristol. We've actually got quite a good relationship with the Bristol Post now because we did one article for them and then it came back, and Rick is pretty much now their retail expert. So they go to him and they come back. So by just striking out on something quite daring like this and daring to put our sort of neck on the line a little bit, we've been able to get quite a lot of coverage back, and quite regular coverage as well. I think that's the point, because when you're thinking in terms of SEO, obviously a link back would be fantastic on every story that we get. But Google also kind of values repetitive links in the same publication over periods of time, providing that the content's decent. So we always make sure to sort of over provide in a way. So we always give more than is needed, and hopefully that sort of stands us in good stead. And it's meant that they've got quite a good average domain authority over the time. If any of these terms are unfamiliar to you, then just let me know. We've also been able to comment on the actual collapse of companies. So obviously Thomas Cook collapsed last year, and we were able to get coverage on the Express. We've also been interested in the future of things like HMV, because that keeps going into administration, keeps getting its future threatened. They've downsized their stores, they've kind of moved around a little bit, they've kind of prioritised certain products over others to try and save it. So it's quite interesting to kind of keep up with that. And I think that's a good point to make as well. You really need to kind of read as much as you can about your niche as well. Like if you're in, say, retail, you really need to be keeping abreast of these things. So Retail Gazette, the tabloids, the big, Financial Times kind of titles, just keep an eye on what's going on. So you're aware, so you could maybe pivot on this kind of coverage yourself. HMV is a saga that just doesn't seem to be ending at the moment. So that's a really interesting one that we've identified that we're still keep an eye on. So as a result of all this, we actually managed to get Rick onto Sky TV and the Victoria Derbyshire show to talk about Brexit. I think this was Brexit 1 year on. So Rick was part of a panel of business people, and this was all on the basis that he'd commented on all these things in the past. So this is what we call the snowball effect in PR. So like if you pick up decent coverage, you sort of use that coverage to get even bigger coverage, and then you can kind of use that almost as a CV or like a pitching document to then get bigger jobs like this. The fact that he was on TV twice in a week, national TV twice in a week, has really helped.
I think one of the things that's worth mentioning here, guys, is that all of this costs nothing. Like everything that Mike's just said is simply time. And you have to start somewhere. The biggest secret that I've learned from working so closely with Mike over this period of time is, just start. And second of all, find a niche that you truly believe in and then go all in on that niche. So, Brexit was a very debatable topic. Rick was like, I'm going to go and be the Brexit guy for businesses. And he went and he owned that space. And over the course of a year, 2 years, he had every single piece of coverage that was debating about Brexit. He would be somewhere around it, which made him the Brexit guy, which got him the coverage, which got him on TV, which then got him the credibility to talk about what he does on those audiences. And that might, it's a snowball effect. And every single time we're doing PR for a brand, we're always thinking, what angle, what is this guy going to be known for? So what think about your business. What do you truly believe in? What are you a great expert at? And go all in on that. Don't dilly-dally around the edges. Make it nice and niche. Go all at it, and you'll see momentum upside. I mean, the problem people have is that they sprinkle a bit here, they sprinkle a bit here. They don't overly commit. They wave back and forwards. You never get anything. So you have to be really kind of committal with this stuff and go all in on it to make sure it's a success. And like Mike said, Rick's been with us since the inception of our PR department. I've been with Mike for years. And yeah, he proves when you believe something, go for it and it'll pay off.
Absolutely, yeah. And as a result, like we've been able to continue that coverage. So I'd say for Allsburton get at least 2 or 3 pieces of national coverage a month. They're sort of called upon for their opinion now. So that's actually a sort of side effect of what you kind of set out to do here. So from being a voice that we've kind of put out there, people now come to us and actually ask him for opinions. He's recently collaborated with some research companies about the future of retail, and because of his articles that are just out there, if you search for Allsburton and under sort of news on Google, then you'll just see the sort of breadth of things that he's commented on. So he's known now as someone who can comment on this sort of stuff, and it's brilliant publicity. They don't even need to know that, you know, at the end of the day, his job's actually quite unpleasant and is quite sort of sensitive. All they really care about is his expertise and what he's saying. I mean, they could be doing anything with a company, but the messaging there is that he's an expert on these kind of subjects. Recently, we've been asked to contribute on stuff. So as the Thomas Cook stuff took off, and we've kind of commented on that quite extensively, people start coming back and saying, well, what about Flybe, and what about kind of other airlines that kind of go in now? So travel companies that are struggling, or were even before coronavirus, they're going to really struggle now. We've all heard the debate around Richard Branson and Virgin Atlantic and things like that. Flybe were an early casualty this year, so we're able to kind of talk about that quite extensively. So yeah, like that's what I say basically. Like reacting to news stories is crucial. So it's almost like you've got to be very well read on these subjects and kind of know what your angle is, and then you can easily go in. So we're going to talk a little bit more about ways you can kind of make a little bit of a mark in PR as well. So link building is something that a lot of people possibly don't know about. So we have started this strategy recently, and it's kind of working already. And it's kind of the idea that if you build a resource that is unique to you and is useful for journalists and sort of appealing for journalists, then they'll want to link back to your website. And that's really where your Google rankings come from. So if you're authoritative and you can kind of provide information that no one else has, or you've got access to data or sort of information that no one has, or you've kind of conducted a survey, or you've kind of looked at ONS figures and gone, well, actually, this is great, but what if we put it in context of this kind of niche or this kind of market to make it work in a different way and to make it work in your favor. So there's a few examples out there, but the key is to be creative. It's as simple as that, really. So it doesn't necessarily need to be linked to your business, as you'll see in the next few slides. So this is another company's done this, but this is a fantastic example that we've kind of seen and taken real inspiration from. So Game produced something a few years ago called the Christmas Tinner, which was like a Christmas dinner in a can. Interesting idea. And the idea was that if you didn't have time to take away from your gaming on Christmas Day, because you got so many amazing products from Game in your stocking, this is a great way to just like chuck it in the cooker and have it, like you don't have to leave your seat. It's a bit of a gimmick, but it's interesting. It got people talking. It's like a layered, sounds pretty disgusting, but it's a layered sort of Christmas dinner in a can. Simple as that. Daft, but it sort of catches the attention. That's why it's on the sun. You can see on this slide that I've got here. So what is really interesting, and like the snowball effect here is quite interesting as well. It got all these links, and that's when they've actually linked back to like a sort of resource almost on the Game website. So there was like infographics, videos, what was like a sort of step-by-step what's actually in this Christmas Tinner thing. It kind of gives a bit of an insight into what it actually is and makes people want to actually click through. So once you're on that Game website, the actual purpose of this was to go and buy a gaming seat or a gaming chair. So there was like lots of interest generated around that, and sales actually increased as a result, which is quite interesting. So yeah, even if it seems like a stupid idea, it can go really far. And what's quite interesting about this one is that over time, people kind of forgot about it. Like 2 years later, they thought, well, do you remember that Christmas dinner idea we did? Why don't we try it again? But because the vegan sort of side of sort of eating and health has elevated in the last few years, why don't we just do a vegan version of this, of the Christmas Tinner? You know, we can say it's back, but this time it's vegan. And again, it had similar success, and yeah, it just kind of builds on that. So it can be something as daft and as ridiculous sounding. I mean, like creative, brainstorms between teams are notoriously crazy, and you get ideas where you think that'll never ever take off. But this is one of them that someone probably put forward and got shot down, and then they went, actually, that might just work. And taking that gamble has actually worked in this instance. So I think a great idea combined with great infrastructure of your website and making sure that your website's sort of up to date and it's really kind of something of value for people to link to. So as we saw before, the Sun will have linked back to this with a direct link to either the resource page or to the gaming chair, gaming seat sort of page. So there's actually a purpose here. So it's actually quite strategic, even though it's got a silly idea with it. So it's a myth, I think. This is what I'm trying to get across. It's a myth that every industry, that any industry would struggle to get PR and would struggle to get links from creative and innovative marketing and innovative PR. So we had a go recently, and this is quite interesting. So we work with a property company that does sort of like house deals and property searches and things like that. And we thought, well, at the end of the day, there's a lot of people out there doing the usual things like top 10 tips for when you're moving house. The big players like Rightmove, Zoopla, etc. have got quite a lot of the advice articles quite sort of pat down. So really, why would we want to sort of add to that noise, and why would we want to sort of weigh in on something which is already being covered by dedicated PR teams for those giants? Why don't we use something that would provide a bit of data and provide a bit of interesting knowledge that possibly wasn't elevated before? So by being a property company, this client was kind of in a really good position to know a lot about the market and know the ins and outs of house prices and how long it took to move and things like that. So we went in on their data. We got like all their sort of past sales data from the last 2 or 3 years. And this is stuff that you can use anonymously. It doesn't have to impact on GDPR. It doesn't have to kind of impact on any privacy. And really what we want to know was very specific things. So we wanted to come up with a campaign that was two-pronged. We want to go national and say, here's the best place for sort of like moving time, say in the UK. Like if you find yourself in South Yorkshire, did you know that actually that's the place where your house deal will take the least amount of time to go through? Maybe, I don't know, Kent would be the worst place to move in terms of speed in the UK, things like that. So by looking into that, we found out these 4 things. So how long it takes to actually move, the cost of housing in that area, information on houses falling through. So that was sort of like an element of what we sort of put together. And we also had a specialism in property law. So like we could comment on what it meant for deals when they actually broke down, what actually ended up happening and the consequences of anything that happened. So it was almost two-pronged in this sense as well. So it was like the data was there, but the advice was also there from this client as well. So that's offering like double the value. So we came up with a really big report and we stuck it onto their website. We came up with quite a good presentation style for it. Lots of infographics that were downloadable. Resources were just there. Photography was there. Images. Video was there if people wanted it as well. So, just providing that full package, because at the moment journalists are time-strapped, newsrooms are smaller than they've ever been. There's less people working in staffed journalism. There's a lot of freelancers out there who want information fast. They've got very, very short deadlines. So if you can be the person that is there for them and can provide useful, sort of tangible advice and material at quite a quick turnaround, the world's your oyster basically. Like there's a lot to kind of take from that. So in effect, what this meant was that we could come up with ideas like this. So when we actually reached out, like people were actually asking, so what cities actually rank highest for this kind of thing? And, you know, where would the best place be to move if you wanted to move quickly, or you wanted to know what the likelihood would be of your house deals falling through, where would you go? And so we were able to say, break it into several different niches. So nationals really liked it because it sort of broke down national like main cities, geographical areas. We could actually then rewrite it in a different way for local titles, and we could kind of go in and say, by the way, did you know that Kent is the worst place to move house? It's not, I'm just making this up, but like Kent is the worst place to move in the UK if you're looking for a fast house move. It's very likely to fall through if you move in that particular area. So just writing something, and to be honest, even if we wanted to, we could possibly go even further. So you could say go into like Lincolnshire, you could break it into region, West Lindsey, North Kesteven, Northeast Lincolnshire, anything, and really get the figures down. Like we've got all this data, it's just a matter of kind of breaking it down and kind of using it in a particular way, because when people are faced with a big chunk of data, a big table or loads of numbers, it's not very interesting. It's black and white. Most people haven't got the time to go through that. Most people haven't got time to crunch it. Most journalists would not have the time or the patience to go through that sort of stuff. So to have that data available and broken down by someone, i.e. us in the sort of medium, has kind of paid off really. It's quite an interesting story. And I think the fact that it's just quite interesting data as well. I mean, normally you'd have to trawl through ONS figures or property documents that are this thick, thousands of pages long. So to have someone to break it down for you is ideal, really. And journalists, some are actually sort of employed purely as data journalists. So their job is to go through data and find the stories. But if you can actually create that for them, then you're actually doing their job for them, and they'll like you for that. And you're more likely to get a link back, that all valuable link at the end. So yeah, we pulled all the data we could, and we created infographics and things like that. And like these are examples of what we said. So Hull ranks the 6th fastest place to move a house in the UK. It's just an example. And again, can't really stress enough the importance of having resources, or at least a more in-depth report on your website. So when you're pitching in these ideas, and when you've got a big chunk of data, and you've got all this infographics, and you've got all this kind of structure in place, it's quite easy just to blow all that data all at once at a journalist and just say, look, here's everything that you'll possibly need in an email, because they'll just take that information, put that in a story themselves. So you need to almost like sort of tailor your pitches to sort of say, I've got this story and I might have some data and I might have some infographics. If you're interested, is this of interest? And like get their attention first. I think media relations is more important than ever. In the past you would be able to just ring someone up and say, I've got a story, do you fancy running it? And they'd say, yep, send the press release over, send a photo if you can. We'll print it, and that was the end of that, and that was job done. But these days it's kind of like you have to include a lot more elements and kind of make sure that you are providing a bit more value if you want to get the value back yourself. This is the next step from sending a press release out. This is the next kind of logical step that most firms should be looking into, but it might be news to quite a lot of people. So yeah, it's also really interesting to search into what you've actually got in terms of your own data. And I think in the same way that I said earlier, that you have a lot of interesting knowledge in your head and like quite niche kind of knowledge of a subject, you don't think that is valuable because you do it every day. That's your bread and butter. That's your kind of 9 to 5. That's what you take home. everyone else in the world doesn't know about that. Everyone else in the world wants to know that. And in the same way, the data that you hold, whether it's customer data, whether it's just like offshoot data from some of the processes that you do, that data's sitting there and no one has it but you. So if you can kind of find your own unique set of data to kind of make use of, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you process it in at least some way, or at least get someone to look at it for you? There's a huge potential here, and I think a lot of people possibly aren't aware that they're sitting on almost like piles of gold. Really, it's amazing. I mean, that client I was talking about a minute ago, the property client, they were like, I don't know why we've not used this before. When we suggested it, they were like, well, yeah, we'll get you as much as you want, really. So we got reams and reams of data and had to kind of break it down between us as a team. But once we did, it's resulted in some great coverage. So, you know, it pays off. It really does. It's just finding what's interesting to journalists and kind of really knowing your audience as well. So, as I've just talked about, like sitting on your data, it's also very, very easy to find data that is just out there as well. So you might want to kind of do background as to whether some of this has been used or sort of talked about before. So make sure that your story's unique, but there's like so much data out there that everyone has access to. So the ONS is obviously the big one. I can send people a list of sites if they're interested in sort of digging through data themselves. I can send you a list of URLs just to browse through and sort of see what you can make of it after. But there is just a lot of free data out there. So there's a lot of freedom of information answers that are quite interesting. So if people have said, well, how many, I don't know, say you're a safety company that's like, how many accidents are caused by, I don't know, playing football by kids in the summer? What were those figures for the last 3 years? Is it going to be different this year because people aren't allowed outside? Are we going to see a lack of physical activity? Will that mean a decline in accidents? Things like that. I mean, A&E has reported today, just an example of the news, A&E today has recorded record level lows because of the coronavirus crisis and sort of A&E not really being used recklessly anymore, or for sort of things that could be dealt with elsewhere. So people are being a bit more cautious. It's just picking up on things like that. That's about all we've got today. But I mean, and I know it's a lot to sort of take in. But if there's anyone who has any questions, then so I'm open to that.
I think one of the things I want you all to understand listening to this is that every single one of you, literally every single one of you, can do this stuff. You can't sit there and say I haven't got the budget for it because it doesn't need any advertising. You can't even right now as a business owner say I haven't got the time for it because business owners have to have the time for it. It's now down to your own inclination of jumping on ONS or going through your customer management systems or going through the reports you have and building out data. And you know, previously, if we go back to 3 or 4 years ago, the strategy for every PR was send out a press release and hopefully it sticks. And if it doesn't stick, we'll call them, we'll chase them. Now, what's happening is if you have something unique, data, they'll come to you because no one else has that but you. You know, from that property company, you know, we're able to sit there and go, Hull is the 6th fastest place to move in the UK, right? Do you think the Hull Mail, or whatever the equivalent is over there, are going to not run that story? These things are dead certs because when you have such unique data and you make it so unique to the coverage, it will always be used. You know, the with the game example, the Christmas Tinner, do you know how hard it is to get a link from a media place to a product? It's incredibly hard, but it's not very hard when you've got something unique like a Christmas Tinner, right? And that's all this is about, is that PR has changed from a journalist job where you're basically writing press releases to a data job where you're analyzing data. And the PR brands and the businesses that can manipulate data and create data in a better way are the ones that win. I saw a really cool PR piece today from, it said, who will be the world's first trillionaire? And essentially what it did was it broke down the daily increase of wealth for the top 10 people, magnitude it till they got to $1 trillion. And it said Jeff Bezos will be a trillionaire by 2026. There's the article. And that was for a financial advice company. So there's so many pieces of coverage out there that you can get your hands on, and you can position yourself as an expert. So many. I mean, every single niche part of your business can be broken down, and you can get data for that, and you can write a story about it. And if you, I'll say this, because a lot of you are quite quiet today with the Q&A, but I'll say this, if you've got any questions about, Pete, I get what you and Mike was talking about, but I'm not really sure how that fits into my business, please let us know. Because I guarantee there'll be a niche. I guarantee there'll be some sort of really unique way to go about it. And like I said, the great part with PR is that there's no advertising spend. It's literally just your time, your Word document, a spreadsheet, and now you've got the most unique angle possible. And in a time which we're going to go into, it's going to be a very difficult time for everyone. They're the real valuable things to have. I say with everything that data is the most important thing. Owning your own data is crucial. Owning your own data you should definitely be doing, but also owning your own data to create content is equally as good. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this session. Hopefully you got value from it. Email me peter.watson@distract.co.uk if you've got any questions or you want to go into anything in more detail. The guys at the productivity program just messaged me to say they'll be contacting you with how to use their grants. They have up to 50% funding at the moment for projects. So if you wanted to try anything that we've discussed, you can probably get a grant for it. And also if you want to hire one of a graduate, I think they'll pay towards a graduate as well. So loads of opportunity, guys. Best of luck over the next few months, maybe years. I don't know how long this thing's going to take. Keep safe. And if you have any questions, let me know. If you want the slides or videos, also let me know. I can send them across to you. But keep safe, and I'll speak to you guys soon.
Thanks, everyone.